Hi everybody. Today we are talking about populism. In week 4, in the material that you have covered, you had to read a chapter about populism and also to watch a short clip. Now, I want you to think about recent political events in the United States. And I want you to do that because we have been witnessing this phenomena or this attempt of using populism here. Populism is a method. It's a way to manipulate or use democracy, mainly democracy, but it can go with other forms of government as well, and to try and get the people to support a certain leader with the promise of getting rid of the corrupt elite that's already in power right now, and instead promoting and serving the will of the people. Now, I have those things in quotation marks here because those are types, those are roles. In almost any populist movement or almost any populist leader, you will see them using this kind of language, that they are that they are trying to dismantle the corrupt elite and serve the people. Now, why did I refer to recent US political history is that President Trump, pretty much from the beginning, but especially if you look at some of his campaign rallies, you can see him using populism and doing so very efficiently. If you remember his big promises of draining the swamp, right? Again, the corrupt elite, making America great again. These great promises that refer to kind of making sure that the government serves the people and serves the interests of the people. And I will refer to President Trump as we go along some of the points here. Populism is not new, but modern populism has some things that are common to wherever it's happening. So regardless of the country and the culture, if we can identify modern populism, we will see this reaction against promises and premises that arguably are violated, right? So if we look at what is the promise or the premise and both of liberal democracy, we look at a society that has a number of groups and divisions, and sometimes those groups are separated completely. Sometimes they are crossing or overlapping, and we can think about gender and immigrants and race and ethnicity and culture and religion and veterans and any kind of groupings of the population. And in a liberal democracy, arguably, all of those groups find ways, peaceful, meaningful ways to work together despite their differences and look for common ground and work for the common interests of the society or the country as a whole. Liberal democracies rely on the rule of law, rely on constitutions, and on the protections of minorities. And all of those things result in stability and hopefully growth, the prosperity of the people and the country and all of those great things. But in reality, as we know, many liberal democracies actually witness those groups, those differences, especially on economic grounds, grow larger all the time. Economic gaps are large and growing all the time. Rich are getting richer, poor are getting poorer. There is that gap there, right? People find themselves pitted or fighting and arguing in a militant way against other groups. So instead of that notion of people celebrating their differences and working together for common ground, we see kind of a situation where groups and factions pretty much fight each other for survival, right? And because of that, and because many people find themselves as not served by the system, they're looking for a change. And this is where a populist leader can come in and promise that specific change, that big change that people are looking for, so the government will serve them once again, right? Almost all populist leaders argue either directly or indirectly that they themselves embody the will of the people, and that they also have more power and legitimacy than the institutions that maybe have been there for tens or hundreds of years before them. What are those institutions? We are talking about things like the court system, the criminal justice system, the electoral rules of the country, free press, right? Or even the constitution itself. A populist leader comes in and argues that those institutions actually serve the elite and perpetuate the power hold that those elite have, making sure that there is no social mobility, that again the interests of the people are not being served. And because of all that, the populist leader steps in and promises that he or she will overturn those institutions and therefore the power structure that those institutions are holding in place, right? If we are talking like President Trump has been talking about, fake news and the liberal media, if we can get rid of those institutions, of those groups, then arguably we can get rid of the power structure that free press holds in place. Populist leaders tend to be charismatic, and again, the leader stand up to be the common will. The leader serves the public in more than one way. They tend to demonize their opponents and to use lies and half-truth to delegitimize other sources of information. So if you believe that the leader in front of you is the common will or stands for the common will, and only their word is the one that we should respect, if there is any challenge that come to that argument from another source of information, you will tend to discount that critical news source and instead accept the leader's arguments. And again, if you look at the rhetoric of President Trump in the last few years, his opponents, he is fully demonizing them and does that in a very straightforward way, right? Calling them liars, even laughing on how they look, calling them crooked and criminals, etc. So really going after the other side, not by challenging their policy choices or suggesting that your policy choices are better, but by attacking them personally and demonizing that. Now, what is the impact of a populist government or a populist leader on the system? Number one, it depends on how successful they are. If they are successful, then we can see the abuse of democracy. They're using the democratic system to get to power and then dismantle those same institutions, those same electoral institutions that brought you to power. You turn around and you try to dismantle them, right? The manipulation of information brings up something that we are in right now, this crisis of we don't know what's real and what's fake, and how do we make those distinctions between the information that we get. The people are being manipulated very clearly and very surgically, right? There is a method behind what populist leaders are doing. Now, even if the system was stable and more or less successful, there is a disruption of the system, and therefore there is a risk of the stability of the system long term. And we also see long-term impact on law and order, because if you can't trust the institutions, then how can you, if you can't trust the courts, then can you really trust the police? And that brings up a lot of other, that brings up a lot of public unrest and risk, long-term risk to the system as a whole. And there's also long-term impact on public trust in all of those institutions in general and the government more specifically. Because if we're not sure who to trust, and if we are buying into this argument that the system is corrupt and only serves some groups in it, then we are losing trust in the system and the government. And the problem with that, or the risk with that, is that without public trust, there is a real risk to the stability of a government, especially democratic government. So these were a few points about populism, and keep that in mind when you are answering the question in discussion forum number 3 that asks you about democracy. We know and we will learn about the many great things of democracy, but populism is one where democracy can lead us astray.